Welcome everyone. My name is Duane and I am happily employed at the Lewis and Clark Interpretive Center. I get to bring to life some living history of some of the rich heritage that we have here in Great Falls, Montana. So today specifically we're going to focus on a part of the expedition that literally happens so often that really there's not much mention of it. We know that it was occurring on a daily basis. I wonder if any of you in the audience might be thinking to yourself, so what would something like that be? It had to happen nearly every day. Not that they couldn't skip this particular demonstration that I'm going to give you, but if they did it for too long, I think the men would have begun to revolt because I don't know about you, but when I've got to eat cold food day in and day out, day after day, I start to look forward to a hot meal. So maybe that's beginning to give some of you a little inclination of what we're going to look at today, and that would be starting a fire. How did they start a fire in the early 1800s when Lewis and Clark and the Corps of Discovery were on the expedition? So that's what we're going to examine today. And I have down here in front of me, I've got a few of the implements that would have been used. But before we get into that, there is a mention in the journals about an interest in fire that they would be introduced to by the American Indians that they ran into. It was a particular Shoshone, and it was on the 29th of August of 1805. So they're here, they're in Montana. It's one of the sergeants of the expedition. His name is Patrick Gass. And anyway, he makes a notation in his journal about being in the presence of the Shoshone who is going to give them a demonstration of how they would start fire. And he mentions that there's one stick that's about 9 inches in length, and they would lay that out flat in front of them on the ground. So I have a piece of cedar here, and he describes it as being somewhat of a softer piece of wood. And then he takes another stick, and in a perpendicular fashion, he's going to rub it back and forth against the shorter one that's on the ground. And the one that he's holding in his hand is a little bit harder stick. This is a piece of chokecherry here, but he just describes how the Indian would begin to rub this stick back and forth on the piece of, in my case, the cedar here, just like I'm doing here. And as he was rubbing it back and forth, it begins to form a dust there on the board itself. And then after a few moments, it begins to smolder and it takes flame. Now, I got to tell you something. So the cook would have been in charge of starting the fire on the expedition. And certainly, as I mentioned earlier, maybe you missed it, but they got one hot meal a day. And it comes at the end of the day. It's the dinner meal. So they've been working really hard every day. Chances are, appetites are up, they're pretty hungry. So they want this part to go pretty fast. Get the fire going, get the food cooked, so we can start eating. All the day to start a fire in the myth of the Shoshone. So you'd all end up disappointed and maybe frustrated at a cold meal, because I can't get this dust that he would speak about that would appear on this board, and this thing is really hot right now. I get a little bit of smoke that comes out, but despite my best efforts, I have never been able to start a fire in this method. And we do know it's not something that the Corps of Discovery would adopt either, but nonetheless kind of interesting that they would see that, witness it, and Sergeant Gass would put that down in the journals. But again, it wasn't something that was going to replace the tried and true that literally all of them had grown up with. So when we think of starting a fire in the early 1800s, it would have been primarily these two implements. I've got here a piece of flint and then the associated steel that's going to be used to make the sparks that eventually is going to build into a fire. So first off, we're going to I'm going to demonstrate to you how this is going to work. So you take the actual piece of flint and then the steels, and you'll see down here I've got a variety of different steels. So, you know, a blacksmith in that day, they're not going to go down to the hardware store and buy new iron stock to make these steels. These are going to be repurposed from something that's already worn out. Like, I've got an old file here. Okay, it's worn out, we can make it fire steel. Maybe it's a nail, it's a hinge. So yeah, they're going to be a variety of shapes and sizes, but they still all have the same purpose, and that is flint is prized because of its ability to hold a really sharp edge. And so what you're doing when you make these sparks with a flint and steel is imagine to yourself as you're striking the steel to that sharp edge, you're actually flaking off little shavings of the steel that are oxidizing and sparking. And that's what you literally are shaving off little pieces of steel every time that you get a spark. So I'll give you just a quick, you'll see what I can get some sparks there pretty easy. So when we think about this, again, you need to have this sharp edge here, and it's something that it doesn't take brute force, brute strength. It really just takes finesse. And so when we think back to the early 1800s, and I always like to ask this question, whose job was it in civilized America at the time, so back on the East Coast in the original colonies, whose job would it be every day to start a fire in the morning? And when I ask that question, I'll get the mom or the dad, and sometimes I'll get somebody to say, well, it was the children, and the children is the exact answer. Yes, it would be the children, and about 5 or 6 years of age, Mom and Dad are going to introduce you to a flint and a steel. You know, there was a number of chores in those days that would have to be done each and every day around the house. Many of them would take some physical stature, which is a 5 or 6 year old. They haven't quite obtained yet. But again, this is about skill and finesse. It doesn't take brute strength. So it was good to start practicing on, and there was certainly a motivation to get good at it. I was failing to do so when they came back in to cook a meal. If there was no fire going on, I guess you got cold cereal that day. But again, when we talk about the skill that it takes to do this, really, you're going to take in one hand, your non-dominant hand, I like to say, and that's where you're going to take your flint. And then in your dominant hand is where you're going to hold the steel. And again, you are striking the steel against the sharpest edge of the piece. And again, you want to strike it in a manner where it's like you're imagining shaving off again. So because again, that is what you're doing. So if you're, just striking it against the flat face, you're not going to get anywhere. And a lot of times when I have people try this for themselves, boy, they get going here. And again, it's really all in the wrist. This hand holding the flint, it's going to remain stationary, holding this as still as you possibly can, and it's just a nice strike against that edge of that flint to get your spark that you're after. So if I had people here now, you'd get an opportunity. I've got flint and steel, and we'd all try this, but since we're going to do this virtually today, I'll just tell you that countless times I've witnessed people try and do this, and they soon realize it does take practice.
Kristen, why don't you jump in there and try?
Kristen, would you like to do that? So let's see. I've got a couple of pieces of steel, so you can choose your favorite shape you like there.
Okay.
I've got a couple of pieces of flint there. I would maybe recommend this one because it's got a bit of an edge already there for you. And
all in the wrist?
It's all in the wrist, and you're going to be... Oh, there you go. They got a spark.
Did I get it?
You got
There's
sparks.
a spark coming out. Yeah, there we go. You keep that up, and we might hire you.
Is it coming?
I mean, it seems like... Good job, Kristen.
Very good.
I'm going to back up now.
I'll get your name before you go, because we might have a job for you.
I'll sign up with an application. Thank you.
There you go. So again, it does take a little bit of practice to get proficient at this, but by the time you're 7 or 8 years old, I mean, you're doing this with like striking a match. You're not even thinking about it. So again, when we look at the expedition, it's not something you're going to sit and talk about and journal down in the journal. But we do know this was the method that they had just to start fire. So it's one thing now, we see how the sparks are started. So how are we going to take sparks and end up with wood, fuel that's burning on our fire to heat up and cook our food? So I'm glad you thought that. We're going to go over that. So yes, we need a means to be able to catch that spark, and then to be able to have a little bit of time to take that spark and now get it going, get some heat to it, because to create fire we need heat, fuel, and oxygen. And so we're going to get some heat to it, and then we've got to get, and in this case I've gathered just some grass from around here. It's nice if it's dry. If it's wet, then I might run out of breath before we get a fire going. You'll see what I'm talking about here in just a moment. So what we're going to do to catch that spark is we're going to use something called char cloth. Has anyone ever heard of char cloth?
No.
All right, so it would be the preferred method. There are other things that you can use even that occur out on the natural landscape, but we're going to look at this char cloth. And so I have some samples here, and it's just literally, it's black, it's cooked fabric, cooked cloth. And so for the men of the expedition, when they begin this great expedition, they've got a number of uniforms that are issued to them. So this would have been the classic undershirt. It's made out of linen. But by the time they got this far along in the expedition, these are wearing out. You know, they're not serving much purpose, or, you know, pants are gone. I've had to resort now to the hides of animals myself. But we're going to repurpose these as they wear out, and we're going to take these and we're going to cut them up into small chunks. And then we're going to take a tin such as this. Any metal tin is going to work. We're going to take those small chunks and we're going to cram that into this tin can, put a lid on it. I'm going to poke a hole in the top of it. And then at the end of the evening, as the fire is dying down, I've got a good set of coals there, that I'm going to go ahead and just throw that tin right into the fire. And it's not going to take very long as that heats up, and then you're going to see white smoke streaming out of there, and it's going to come out of there with a vengeance. And that's going to go on for quite a while, and then begin to dissipate, and then finally quit altogether. And you're going to want to carefully get that out of the fire, let that cool down. You don't want to open it up while it's really hot like that, because it gets that sudden rush of oxygen. Very easily might go poof and all burn up on you. But once it cools down, then you open it up, you've got your char cloth or your cooked cloth. So this is pretty amazing stuff. And like I said, this is what is going to be used to catch one of those sparks that you were making and you saw me making. And it gives me a little bit of time to be able to apply the spark to my fuel. And then the idea is we're going to get that going, and then once we've got flame, then you could ignite larger fuels. So, again, let's see if I can demonstrate how this is going to work. I do have a favorite kind of flint, or steel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my flint, and I take that char cloth, and I want to get that char cloth in close proximity where I'm going to be striking. Caught one of the sparks. You see how that's going?
Oh my gosh.
All right, so that's what I need. I'm going to give myself a little insurance policy here before I go to
You can smell it.
Yeah, it smells good.
burn it. My grass here, my dried grass, I'm going to make, I just call this a bird nest, and I'm going to just insert my char cloth into my bird's nest. Why you don't want wet fuel, wet grass.
Hear that breath?
I can see smoke. Does it? Yeah.
Smells like backyard. Bonfire in the summertime.
How cool.
It's also why I do it on my knees, because if I do pass out, I don't have far to go.
Oh my gosh. All from one spark.
I know.
I think there we go.
Oh
The flame is going, and I can apply this to my smaller fuels and build up, and eventually it's going to lead to a fire that's going to cook my meal. So
Wow.
that is just a quick demonstration of how we go from that simple spark, we catch that on the piece of char cloth, and then we take that, apply that to our dried grasses or whatever our tinder might be, and then we can ignite and start our
We get a
our
hot
bigger
meal
fuels.
at the end
there
of the
you go.
day.
You got hot food is coming.
That is
Yes.
awesome.
So, you know, if you didn't have char cloth, what are some things that occur naturally on the landscape? You know, you could get some really fine grasses. This would be too thick here. But you could get some really fine, small grasses and get those together really dry, and that can catch a spark. You can use the fuzz out of cattails.
Oh.
You know
That'll work. The fibers out of like a hemp rope or something, that'll work as well. But yeah, that is the method that they would use to start a fire. And like I said, each and every day. Now, They also had another means that they could have certainly started a fire with this. Either of you have any idea what this might be right here?
No.
Now, this was cutting edge today. Maybe this will give you a little bit of a hint. I can take this
A magnifying glass.
that it is a burning lens. So this is a tinder box. And the idea being here, I can put my pipe tobacco in here, and when I'm ready to have a smoke, I can remove my tobacco, I load up my pipe, and then I can use the burning lens. Now, what's going to be the one thing that we're going to have for all of this?
Sun.
Yeah, we're going to have good sunlight. Now, today we actually have decent sunlight that, and you know, it's just, and I'm sure you've probably seen this before, but you got to narrow that down there.
On Toy Story.
There you go.
Oh my gosh.
On there. It doesn't take too long to ignite that. Well, it started to glow in. But they had a number of these that Lewis would purchase to bring on the expedition with him. And the idea being, well, let me bring this up a little bit.
Wow.
Anyway, yeah, you see a little bit of smoke coming off there. But Lewis brings a number of these along with him. He's going to use them as trading items with the American Indians. And they did find them fascinating and were interested in having some for themselves. So they certainly could start a fire with these. Although, like I said, the limitation being they're going to need some sun. And when we think about, you know, where they stayed for that winter of 1805, 1806, they've made it to the Pacific Ocean. They've built what's called Fort Clatsop, and in the nearly 5 months that they would winter over there, there's 12 days that they record that it didn't rain. And of those 12 days, only 6 of them did they record that there was any sunshine to mention. So yeah, that would have been a bad option if that would have been the only thing that they would have. The other thing, a couple of things I like to bring up in this program. Well, first off, when we look around our landscape here and we think of fuel, you know, wood, we got a lot of prairie here. Mm-hmm. And certainly they found that too. So any ideas on what might be an alternative fuel source that would be used when there wasn't a lot of wood to be gathered? Now, I will tell you that there was plenty of this this fuel produced all over the Great Plains.
Corn.
In those areas, not corn.
Tumbleweeds.
It was a byproduct from an animal.
Oh. Poop?
Yes, bison poop. Very good. In fact, let's see, it was the 13th of June of 1805 when Lewis first comes into this area, and actually just a little bit farther up the river from where we are now. He'd crawl up on the north shore there, and as he gets up, crests up over the top of the coulee, he records seeing over 10,000 bison that he estimated were out across this prairie. So there was plenty of bison poop producing capability all over the prairie. And yeah, you know, what is bison poop? I mean, it's really compressed grass. So you don't want to go pick up the fresh ones, but once they've cured just right out there in the sun, they're going to burn just right. In fact, Lewis does make comment to feeling as if it imparted somewhat of a spicy flavor to the food when it was cooked.
Smell?
It does have a unique smell. I'm not going to say it. To me personally, it's not an endearing smell. It kind of smells like grass burning. But it is well suited for those that had used this for generations upon generations before Lewis and Clark ever came here. The American Indians that they would find, this being their homeland, they collected and used this as fuel for their fires and their teepees, and it's well suited for that. It burns very evenly, a low flame, and not a whole lot of smoke, all of which are good when you're cooking inside of your teepee. And I always like to ask this question: whose job was it, do you think, to collect this in Indian culture so that they could have
Who first thought to test that out?
Right? I think that about a lot of things.
Yes.
Again, it's going to be the children that go out and collect this stuff. And it won't take them long before they're going to figure that out. So I I've always imagined when you're a novice at this, you know, you go out and you're looking for just the right cowpie or bison poop, and you maybe flip it over with your toe, and as long as you come back with a clean toe, you can figure, well, I can probably take that one with me. But yeah, so this is the fuel that they used. And then the last thing I like to talk about is I have a nodule of flint right here that was highly, highly prized during the time that Lewis and Clark came up through, and then as Western expansion and more would come out here. This flint, on the good, better, best scale, this is the best flint that could be had. And it comes from one particular area. It's a ways from here, though, not too far. It's over in North Dakota at Knife River. And it still occurs there today, but it was a highly prized flint. It really held a very sharp edge, stood up a little bit longer than some of these other kind of flints, and you know, even compared to these two, it's a much darker, almost denser type of flint. You can feel that if you want. It's pretty heavy.
Oh, it is. I was not expecting that. Very cool.
All right, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to be able to share some of this with you. I wish we could do it in person, but for the time being, this is what we have. So it's exciting to get this out, and I hope you enjoy it. And I hope you might get a chance to come out and see the Interpretive Center for yourself, face to face, maybe participate in things like this. We don't have a date to open yet, but one day we will be open again. So thank you all very much.